Welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, and I'm elated today to be joined by Beverly Donofrio, who is a Middlesex alumna, a Wesleyan alumna, and a writer of some renown, and most recently a memoirist. So we're going to be talking about all kinds of things, but I thought I would ask if you would start by talking about your experience as a Middlesex student and transferring to Wesleyan with the Etherington Scholarship and what that was like for you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say how thrilling it is for me to be here. I mean, I'm getting choked up. So I came here when I was 24 years old, having been a teenage mother. I had a 6-year-old who just entered first grade, so I could come and have enough time in the day to fit my classes in. And I had been in the bottom third of my class in high school. I was a wild girl who really screwed up, and this was like a second chance. It was really a lifesaver. So I'm in a class, and the first semester, I don't remember what class. It could have even been English composition, and I overhear a young woman next to me saying, I'm going to get all A's and then get a scholarship to Wesleyan University. And I thought, she's so full of baloney. And then I thought, well, I'm going to ask her just to see what she'll say. I said, so how can you do that? And she said, oh, there's a scholarship called the Etherington Scholarship, and if you get all A's, you're pretty much a shoo-in. And so I thought, whoa, I'm going to get all A's and go to Wesleyan University. And that's what I did. And Wesleyan was an amazing experience. Wesleyan was kind of like finishing school. I went from here to there, by then thinking, maybe I really could be a writer. Maybe I really could. When I first entered here and I went to a counselor, they said, so what would you like to major in? What are your likes? And I said, journalism, thinking that was something that one could get paid for maybe, and feeling like I was kind of lying, like how could I ever be a journalist, but he's asking me to say something, so I have to say something, and I said journalism. And by the time I finished here, it had become pretty much a real dream. And then I went to Wesleyan and met people who'd actually written books, and they were just normal people, and I thought, I can do this. And so I was launched.
Did you major in English at Wesleyan?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But it's a long haul from reading about literature in the 18th century in Great Britain to actually outlining a novel, writing a novel. How did you make that first step? And I've just asked you a giant question. So maybe we should segue to taking a break, and then when we come back, I'm very curious about that. And I'll tell you partially why I always encourage people to take literature courses, art courses, theater courses, because until you actually get into it and try to do it yourself, you don't realize how incredibly complex it is. I marvel at people like Charles Dickens who could write on pieces of paper and carry characters, through thousands of pages.
He's totally, obviously, an exception. I mean, he wrote prolifically so many books in serial form.
Right.
What an imagination. All those characters, all those plots, I cannot fathom that.
Yeah, neither can I. Well, we'll pick it up after the break, and we'll talk about the craft of writing. Well, welcome back. Today, talking with Beverly Donofrio, a graduate of Middlesex and of Wesleyan and a renowned writer and memoirist. And this is the Middlesex Moments radio show, and I'm so pleased that you're still out there in the listening audience wanting to hear from her about her experience as a writer and also, as I like to say, a kinetic kitten for a period of time. Yeah, but she's been all over the world too. So, and we need a much longer radio show for all of this. But let's talk about the craft of writing. So, how did you go from being an English major, which I was also, to actually writing your first novel?
Actually, I've never written a novel. They're all memoirs, except for a young adult novel, which I wrote after my first 2 memoirs. However, I thought of writing Cars with Boys, my first memoir, as a novel, and I began it when I went to graduate school at Columbia University for an MFA. So before that, at Wesleyan, I was writing poems, and I had an amazing professor, Tony Connor, and we would go in his living room, and every week we'd write a poem, and we'd all read our poems and discuss them, and it was just, I don't know, so freeing and wonderful. And I thought of myself as a poet, and I moved to New York City and kept a journal and wrote lines here and there, and every once in a while managed a poem, but mostly I was writing letters and trying to write a novel and didn't have a clue how to write a novel. So I moved to New York when I was 28. I turned 30. I get hit by a car.
Oh, no.
And I'm like what am I doing with my life? I mean, I say that I'm a writer. I'm working all these terrible jobs to give myself time to write, but I'm too depressed and I'm too stuck and I'm going to bars too much, and this isn't the warm-up anymore. It's a ball game. Get your act together. So in order to apply to an MFA program where I saw my favorite writer, Richard Price, was teaching in an ad in the Village Voice at Columbia, I had to write 3 short stories. So I joined this free writing workshop, wrote 3 short stories, and was admitted. And I'd go into those classes and they'd say narrative. And I thought, what's a narrative? I mean, I really, really was clueless. And graduated and finished the requirement, which was 150 pages of whatever, could be a collection of short stories. For me, it was 150 pages of Writing Cars with Boys, which I thought of as a novel. And it wasn't that good, but I graduated. So then I started working for magazines in which I was copy editor. So I had to study what those writers were doing. I had to read line by line really carefully. And I thought, I could write this stuff. So I started submitting little things to the magazine, and they printed them. And then I thought, oh, now I'm a published writer. And a friend at Columbia had done a memoiristic essay for the Village Voice about having her first child, and it was a cover piece. And I called her up and I said, how'd you get that? And she said, oh, easy. You could call my editor, come up with an idea, call my editor. And I thought, well, I'd like to write about being an Italian-American teenage mother whose father was a cop. And so I proposed it to the editor, who said, oh, I'm a Jew, and my father was a cop in the Bronx, because mine was going to be about Italian-American. So she invited me to do it. I wrote a draft. She had me sit with her at her office and said line by line, went through it with me, and really taught me a lot. And I published that, and with that, on the strength of that, I got an agent. My teacher, Richard Price at Columbia, had said, you can get an agent with this, you can get a book, call my agent. I called her, she said, you can get a contract with this, but you're going to have to write, imagine that you're a proposal in which you imagine you're addressing a garden party and telling them why the heck they should be interested in the story of your life, and you only have 5 minutes. So it took me 3 months to write these 5 double-spaced pages. I submitted it. I got a contract to write the book. I meet with my editor, and I say, novel, and he says, novel? I bought a memoir. Memoirs are so much easier to sell. We can publicize in memoir. And I thought, well, I haven't really made anything up, I guess. So, yeah, okay, memoir. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I was launched as a memoirist. And I used novelistic techniques, which I learned in graduate school, about scene writing and summary and transitions. Handed in my first draft, and it was not so good, and worked and worked and worked. It took me, well, only 2 years since I got the contract, but 7 years basically I was trying to write that book before it actually got published. So it wasn't easy, and it's never easy.
It can't be easy, no. And then that book was made into a film, so what was that like to see that somebody else's imagination of your memoir?
Well, yeah, it was a process. It took that writer 9 years. And I saw all the drafts of it, and I was a producer on the movie. And so by the time they actually made the movie, I was inured. I knew they'd changed a whole lot of stuff. I knew their rationale for changing it. Still, I hated that. I asked in the end, could they just change your name from Beverly? Because that's not really me. That's not really what happened. And they said no. So there, how you hear about Native Americans feeling like when their picture is taken, their soul is robbed from them.
Yes.
Well, it was like, gazillions of people all over the world think that that's Beverly Donofrio. So, but I'm not complaining. I mean, it changed my life. I sold 1 million books. I made a lot of money. It was a wonderful experience. However, if you go to Facebook and you type in Beverly Donofrio, you'll get my page, but you'll also get a page that's a Beverly Donofrio page with Drew Barrymore's picture, in which her friends are like Cameron Diaz with the name of the character that she played. So it's just a little weird.
Right. You must have gone to the opening of the film.
Oh, that's a whole story in itself. It opened right near 9/11, right after 9/11.
Oh.
We were to be the first movie premiere to open in New York City after 9/11. It was in October. And Drew was on Saturday Night Live doing promotion for the movie the week before, and anthrax was discovered in the building, and she freaked out, and she left New York and said, I'm not going to be, I can't do this premiere. So they canceled the premiere, and they tried to spin it that Sony didn't want their executives in the air, but it got out that it was Drew, and like there were headlines, Drew Barrymore, Chicken Little, can't come to her own opening when we have to live here, and it was just horrible for the movie, and it was horrible for my family and all my friends who like bought outfits and rented a limo, and yeah. So we didn't have our premiere.
You didn't have the premiere?
No.
It just opened at movie theaters across the country?
Yeah, and it had a really slow beginning. I mean, it was a bad time to be opening a movie because of the nation's response to 9/11. We were all in shock. But also it just poisoned the opening of it to have that negative publicity. However, it had a slow build, and it still plays all over the world. I get emails from people in China, young women who are too young to be mothers, and it's really incredible. It's been a wonderful thing.
It is incredible to think about how American culture does make its way around the globe.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I was in Beijing, and I had just arrived, and so I was 100% jet-lagged, and turned on the television set, and there was an English-speaking station, and they were showing Big Love. Which,
wow.
And I thought, oh, this is, I wonder what they think about American culture.
We're infecting the whole world.
Yeah.
Poor world.
Yeah. Were you living in New York at the time? During 9/11?
No, I was living in Mexico. I had moved to Mexico to write my second book, which is Looking for Mary. And and we heard it. I was in a coffee shop when I heard about it, and I was devastated, thinking, oh my God, my son lived in New York, and I couldn't get through, and we didn't know what was going on. It was horrible for everybody. I mean, it's never really been quite the same.
No, it really hasn't been the same. So you went from that whole experience to moving to Mexico. Mm-hmm. So why did you move to Mexico?
Oh, well, I fell in love with the Virgin Mary. I got really depressed when I was like 40. Everything that I had ever dreamed of had come true. I sold my book to the movies. I had a bundle of money. I had a house by the ocean. I had a contract to write another book. I had success. I had money. I had autonomy. I had freedom to write every minute of the day if I wanted to. And I was depressed. And I didn't know what that was about. And so I finally got myself together again to go to a therapist, my second therapist. And she said, well, perhaps, this is too long a story. And to make that long story short, I ended up collecting Virgin Marys at yard sales, not knowing why. And my house filled up with so many of them, it could have been a shrine. And I got less depressed, and I got kind of happy, and I made friends, and I felt different. And so then the movie looked like it was going to be made, and I drove across country and thought there must be Virgin Mary apparition sites around this country. I'm going to go to them. And that became basically the subject of my next book. And when I began writing my next book, I went to Mexico for the summer to write because I had been there before. And a friend was living there, and he said, you should come and write your book here. And I thought, you're right. Mary's above more altars in that country than Jesus Christ. It's Mary's country. Where else? So I went for the summer and thought, oh, this is just the life. I'm going to stay. And I lived in San Miguel de Allende, a old colonial mountain town with a whole lot of really interesting, great expatriates, and a huge culture, lots of readings and music and dance and good friends, and the Mexicans who were just know how to stop and smell the roses.
Different culture again.
Different culture.
Part of the world.
Yeah.
We got to break again. We'll slip away, and a PSA will take our place. And welcome back to the Middlesex Moments Radio Show. Beverly Donofrio and I are talking about all kinds of things related to writing, and we were just talking about the search for Mary and moving to Mexico. So I did want to ask you about sense of place, because I think that's really, it's for me, it's kind of a thing I think about all the time. So how does place make its way into your consciousness and then into your writing, or does it?
That's a good question. I think less so for me than most writers. I move all the time. I'm a vagabond. I've lived in 30 different places. However, I am aware that place is important, so I'm very careful to include a sense of place in the book. It's not the thing that motivates me, but it adds a dimension and a richness to one's book to have, where things are happening and the flavor of that. And So no, not me.
Yeah. No, that's fine. It sounds like interior journeys here. If you were collecting these statues.
It's interesting. So much of it is reflection. It's not just what happened, it's the why of what happened. And as a writer, you don't necessarily know until you've maybe finished a couple of drafts of your book. With Writing Cards with Boys, I knew I had an amazing story to tell. It's kind of like a People magazine success story. You know, girl gets pregnant in high school, gets arrested, is on welfare, and makes good. She goes to great school and becomes a writer, and her kid is a success. So those are the events that happened. And so I wrote it, and it had been accepted. I had a contract. I wrote it really carefully, my first draft, and had to do it all over again. And only that second time around did I come to what it was really about, which is, Hamlet said it much better than I can. Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So getting pregnant in high school, having a kid too young, was a curse and ruined my life, or it was a blessing and enriched my life. And that has basically become the theme of every one of my books, and it's not imposed. Life gives it to me. Get run over by a car, go to graduate school. It's always these hard times, the pain, that brings me to new understanding, new growth. And so when I went through after realizing, so this is what this book is about, then I could go through and kind of weave that bit of reflection, weave some images and things that will amplify that throughout the book. So memoir is kind of like, if you think of the present as a flat line and then reflection as the beep, you stop and you interject what you think about it or what you've learned about this. So yeah, in that respect, it is interior.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking one of my most favorite books is a book called The Unpredictable Past.
Oh, I don't know that book.
Yeah, it's a book about history, but the point of it is exactly the. I mean, I love Shakespeare, so that's great. Shakespeare is always right about almost everything. But the point of Unpredictable Past is that we think we know the past, but when we go back and tell it, it is unpredictable, and there are all these other elements that. We can predict the future with certainty because there's no way to test it, right? You can say anything about what will happen tomorrow, but the past is actually unpredictable, which flies in the face of what we think, which is that we know our histories, and memoir has got to be that incredibly dynamic process of saying, we know what happened.
Yeah, the facts of it,
right.
But memory, that's why it's called memoir. It's like if I told you the story of last Thanksgiving and my brother told you the story of last Thanksgiving, they're completely different stories because we see the world through eyes, prejudices, preconceptions. So it's just my memory when I'm writing a memoir, and my memory is just about everything. Let
me ask you something. There's a very interesting writer, now deceased, named Douglas Wolfe. I don't know if you ever ran into him.
No.
Very much on the margins, but he wrote a lot, and I knew him for, a period of 10 years or so. And I was always amazed by seeing things like, for example, conversations we'd had show up in the book. So, all right, so memoirs. So do people say to you, I read that, and that was something we were talking, or I had that experience with you?
No one ever has, which leads me to believe they're afraid of me. Because I'm sure that it wasn't the same for them.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
No one ever has.
Okay.
No. Well, actually, the last book, this is the only time I ever did it. I gave the book, I went to live in a monastery and was living with 3 other monks. And it's a retreat center, and people come there to renew themselves and have amazing spiritual experiences. And I really did not want to tell anything out of school because it was their time as well as my time. So I wanted the monks to read it and give me their approval. So they read it, and one of the monks said, her sister had been a founder who had left the monastery. And I said, I hated the stained glass windows in the chapel. And in a conversation, and Connie in the conversation said, my sister was depressed. And she said, could you please take that out? Because Tessa maybe would be offended or not. And I said, sure. I mean, that was nothing.
Right.
But if it were something that was important, I probably wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
But It felt good to do.
Right. Yeah. You have to make a million choices when you write.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when you obviously rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. So
writing is rewriting.
Yeah.
You know, I have a friend who was a soap opera writer. And she began as a typist on the show, and as she was typing, she would make little corrections. And so they thought, oh, well, she might be a really good editor. And she got promoted eventually to editing. And when she was editing, she realized, well, as long as there's something on the page, you can make something from it. And so she then became a writer because she was no longer so intimidated by the empty page. Just said, I'm just going to put something there.
So I was going to ask you, do you write every day? Is that a piece of the discipline?
Well, for many, many years, I wrote every day, and I mostly write every day, but I've been doing it now for over 30 years, and I've got the chops, so I don't have to write every day. However, it's like a muscle. It's like if you decide I'm going to get in shape and go running, you run for a quarter of a mile and you're about to die the first time, and it's really hard. And then if you keep at it, it gets easier and easier and easier. And if you do it every day, it gets easier all that faster. And it's the same with writing. If you just keep the muscle toned, if you do it every day, then it's never going to be, oh my God, I have to write today, because you're exercised.
Right.
You can do it.
Right. Yeah.
So it really helps to do it every day.
Have you taught writing?
Yes, I teach at an MFA program right now at Wilkes University in Pennsylvania. It's a low residency, so it's kind of like the community college of MFA programs, because most of the people have jobs, they have kids, they have families, and the only way they can do it is coming twice a year in January and June for a week for on-site workshops and all kinds of stuff, and then they do it so I'm online with their mentors. So after the first semester, they begin writing with me memoir, sometimes a novel, and they send me their stuff, and I comment on it and edit and ask questions, and then they write it over again and send it back, and by the end they have hopefully a finished manuscript, at least a draft of a novel or a memoir that goes to an outside reader who then gives them a response. It's like a agent or a editor.
People still need agents, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know. There's all this self-publishing, but, I'm just so grateful I don't have to go that route. It seems like a whole lot of work. And also, it's not respected in academia. So had I just published myself, I would not be able to be teaching writing at a college.
Mm-hmm. When you deal with your adult students who are coming just twice a year, can you characterize them, or are they such a different group?
Oh, they're so different. One of my favorite students is exactly my age, which is 64. She's a multiple personality, and she was writing a memoir about her multiple personalities. So I would get a manuscript, and it was like, oh my God, the syntax and the grammar, I mean, I couldn't even believe it. And so this was when we first began writing, and I sent it back, and I'd send it back to her, and I say, this is unacceptable, at least do grammar check. And then she'd say, I didn't send it.
Oh, no.
So it was her 5-year-old who had sent it. But
okay,
anyway.
Well, that's got to rank up among the most bizarre teaching experiences. Yeah.
Eventually, we reined all our personalities in, and we let the writing personality take over. And she wrote a beautiful book.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, are you working on a project now?
I'm working on a play, and it's a 2-woman play with music, and there are going to be 5 songs. My collaborator and I have written 3 of them, and it's Young Bev and Old Bev, and Young Bev is 30 years old. She's just been hit by the car, has a cast on her foot, and is crippled up in her dinky, dumpy East Village apartment. And Old Bev is 58 and has just been raped 2 years ago, which is what happens at the beginning of my last book. And so there they are, and who knows how they even got there, but they then have a conversation and a battle and a dance and some songs, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Who's your collaborator?
Her name is Nancy Lee Baxter, and she and I used to live together in Orient, New York, and we were in a writing group, and she would be writing lyrics, and I'd be writing a novel at that time. And when Writing Cars with Boys looks like it was going to be a movie, she said, I'm going to write a song if you'll introduce me to the producers, and maybe they'll use it. No problem if they don't. And they went with period music, so they didn't use it. But then it became the penultimate song in Holes, that movie. Do you know
Yes,
that?
yes.
So when the the woman in the past is charging on a horse, this song is playing, and it's called I Will Survive. And it's like, not too smart, screwed up, whatever, kind of like my story.
Sure.
So when I went around giving readings, I was in New York, and she came to the reading, and I had her sing the song as an introduction. And that gave me the idea, wow, we should do some songs for a play. That's how that was born.
It's going to be great to be able to see that produced. I
Yeah.
would love to see it.
Great.
Well, your life has been so dramatic in a way. I mean,
Yeah, it's been eventful.
Yes.
Yeah, as an old boyfriend used to say, never a dull moment.
Well, you're going to be coming back to campus, right? So we won't have a dull moment next month, right?
Oh,
For
yeah,
a whole-
I'm really looking forward to
It's
it.
going to be great. So there's a women's forum, and that's open to the public. And I know you're going to do some work with the students. And
Yes, we're going to do a workshop. I'm excited about that. I already know what I'm going to do. Hopefully they're going to be poets and novelists and memoirists, and I've got the perfect exercise for them all.
Well, thank you, Beverly Donofrio. This has been wonderful. And this has been the Middlesex Moments radio show. I've been visiting with an alumna today, so it's a sort of a double treat for me to meet individuals who went to Middlesex back in the day. I mean, it was back in the day before Chapman Hall even existed. If anyone out there is interested in learning more about this marvelous community college called Middlesex Community College, you can find us on the web at mxcc.edu. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College. Always proud to say that, and wishing you all a very good day.